Number 10. Mockingbird. This wasn't a weird pairing because it was so much really bad or anything, it was just more weird because it was pretty random. Although these two had some fun moments, most fans felt that there just wasn't much staying power between them. Also, Spider-Man is a major jokester, and Mockingbird seemed to actively dislike laughing at Peter's jokes. She's pretty no nonsense. The nice thing is that Peter didn't have to worry about Bobby when it came to her being strong, independent, and being able to take on any baddies who might come her way because of her attachment to Spider-Man. In the end, however, everyone kind of felt the relationship was more of a placeholder, something for now but not for forever, as these two both had much more memorable and well-suited pairings when it came to the world of comics matchmaking. And there's also that weird thing of, they don't really have much in common besides their work, so there's that. Number 9. Mary Jane Watson. I know, how could Mary Jane make the list again, you might wonder. You're like, Amanda, really, Mary Jane? Which Spider-Man is she paired with now that's so weird, you wonder? Well, once again, I am not talking about her relationship with Peter Parker, although if we really wanted to explore some of their alternate relationships from alternate Earths and some specific moments in their relationship, there are a few times that even those two have been weird together. But no, this time around we are talking about Mary Jane Watson and Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. When did this happen? Where did this happen? In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610. The two weren't ever officially together, but Jessica definitely had feelings for MJ as she shared the memories, thoughts, and emotions even of Peter Parker, who she was a clone of. Yeah, in Ultimates, Jessica Drew has a different origin story, and like Ben or Kane are on Earth 616, she herself is also a clone of Peter, just a female clone, who was created by Dr. Kurt Connors and Dr. Otto Octavius for the CIA and FBI. The weird thing was less that Jessica was attracted to MJ, and more that she was attracted to her because of Peter's memories. None of her memories were her own, because that's how cloning works in this reality apparently. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already and if you're enjoying it. Because yeah, weird things deserve likes, I think. Number 8. Carly Cooper. Carly ended up basically hating Spider-Man after being in a relationship with him, which was pretty unfortunate considering that she was a fan favorite when it came to her relationship with Peter. Carly was very patient with Peter initially and didn't even seem to mind when Peter would kinda zone out when they were together and not even notice when she left a gathering early, which is pretty awkward. She worked as a forensic specialist for the New York Police Department, so they seemed like a logical match. Both were brainy and involved in the fight for justice. However, when Peter Parker revealed that he was Spider-Man, Carly found herself unable to continue their relationship, and the two broke up. However, Carly would still be haunted by this revelation and secret, which she fought very hard to protect. It eventually caused her to move away from New York for a time after a traumatic event where she found herself exposed to the Goblin formula and transformed, being given the name Monster and recruited into the Goblin King's Goblin Army. Carly was later cured, but this experience would definitely stay with her. Number 7. Elizabeth Tyne. Elizabeth Tyne was initially introduced by the name Janine Godby, which was an alias that she assumed to escape her past. The weird thing about this relationship wasn't so much how it unfolded, though being in a relationship with any clone of a superhero is always going to be weird, but more in how it started, and in Elizabeth's resemblance to another major love interest from Spider-Man comics, Mary Jane Watson. I specifically just want to focus on the weird interactions in the beginning of this relationship though, although it is weird that, Ben Reilly's a clone and then Janine/Elizabeth just happens to resemble Mary Jane. That's pretty weird. Ben Reilly approached Janine initially and upon their first meeting was taken with her, asking her out in the most bizarre and kind of strangely movie-esque way. He's like, look, I know this is going to sound like a line, but well, I'm new in town. I know that's lame, but I swear it's true. It's just lame that you're using it as a line, Ben. So I'm new in town, and well, I was wondering if maybe we could have, I don't know, dinner tonight? And initially Janine just turns him down, and I think we can see why from that thing that he just said, which is a lot. I feel like Ben also got Peter's awkward charm as well in the cloning process. However, because it is charm, even though it is awkward, Janine immediately changes her mind because, yeah, awkward charm. Ben never makes it to their date, however, because hero stuff, but does run into Janine and apologizes and asks if they can try again. Now, she initially says no once more, and I actually love this one series of panels so much. I wish that they had just left it there because it's really funny, but she actually adds like right after that he can take her to lunch right now. How spontaneous and romantic and kind of presumptuous, but okay. I also like that he's just like, alright, great, I wasn't doing anything. It's like if that were me, I'd probably be like, well, maybe not now, but like maybe in a bit. Number 6. Rogue. So this isn't main continuity Spider-Man or Rogue, but it's still a romantic moment that happened between the two characters, just on the Earth of 161. The two teamed up together in X-Men Forever 2. Rogue at the time had the guise of Nightcrawler, but still sports her very familiar brown and white hair. When Spider-Man encourages her to follow her heart, she warns him that she just might do that, sugar, and leans in to kiss him. I know what you're thinking, a kiss with Rogue could be deadly, but here Rogue was led to believe that she actually would be able to kiss Spider-Man without hurting him, so no worries there, don't panic. However, the romantic rooftop moment was then interrupted by Jean's telepathic shouts for Rogue's assistance. Those telepathic romance blocks, you know what I mean? Jean's like, help. Rogue's like, it's not a good time. Number 5. DEBRA Whitman. This is an interesting relationship considering it was very one-sided. DEBRA Whitman was a secretary at Empire State University where Peter was a student. She pined after Peter, and although at times it seemed like Peter didn't even notice her existence, the two started dating. Needless to say, they didn't make for a great partnership due to the fact that Peter kept having to bail on their dates to attend to heroic business as Spider-Man, but didn't really want to confide in DEBRA, so he just gave her a ton of really lame excuses. Eventually, the two broke up, but DEBRA remained obsessed with him and began to fantasize and hallucinate that he was Spider-Man, in essence making the ultimate excuse for his behavior while also idolizing him. When her therapist approached Peter after learning of this and asked him to wear a Spider-Man suit to help shock her out of her fantasy, he refused to do so, which obviously the therapist was like, well, that's weird, but okay. DEBRA, becoming delusional, later ended up in a toxic relationship as a result of all of this, making excuses for her then husband. Fortunately, Peter did eventually confess to her that he was Spider-Man, which helped DEBRA to move forward and woke her to the truth of her current relationship, motivating her to get a divorce. Thank goodness. Still pretty crazy. Number 4. Mary Jane Watson. Again. Another weird Spidey pairing with Mary Jane also comes to us from the Ultimates, because Spider-Man's clones all had his memories, they were just all basically into MJ. And not just Jessica. All the clones were meant to have their memories wiped so that they could develop their own identities and also be used in the process, but they escaped the facility where they were kept before this could happen. As a result, Kane, who also here sports an even creepier version of his half-melted face, ends up trapping Mary Jane and kidnapping her, claiming it's all out of love for her. Oh, if someone does that to you, you just need to get out of there. Seriously. Which is what MJ tries to do. She's like, no, let me out! Initially, she thinks that he's Peter from a silhouette, but then when she sees his face, she's horrified and knows something is definitely wrong, and this probably isn't her Peter Parker. Of course, she is right. Kane, out of love for MJ, wants to protect her by making her stronger. To do this, he exposes her to the Oz formula, which ends up turning her into a big red monster temporarily. I bet you thought I was going to say a big red dog, but no, that's Clifford. Fortunately, the real Peter Parker shows up and is able to use his presence to calm MJ down, transforming her back into a normal teenage girl. Well, normal. I mean, I feel like she just went through some stuff and she might transform again, but sort of normal. Mostly normal. Number 3. Louise Kennedy. The story of Louise Kennedy comes with a pretty powerful moral. Never date Kane Parker. Louise was a cop in Salt Lake City who had turned dirty and was on the criminal drug lord Vincent Tannen's payroll. She and Kane shared a night of passion, and both had feelings for the other. Both became this light in the darkness for one another, this hope that they could be redeemed or saved or become better. After Kane found out about Louise's betrayal, however, he ended up being forced to confront her and eventually killed her as a result. After snapping her neck, he left his mark on her, burning her face with the mark of Kane, shocking Ben Reilly, who was actually there to witness all of this, and whom he'd actually saved in killing Louise. It's a very terrible end to a relationship. Let me just burn your face after you're already dead. Number 2. Mia Flores. One of the most random when it comes to Peter's interactions with women. Mia Flores kissed Peter while he was out with Carly Cooper, Harry Osborn, and Lily Hollister. Like, she just randomly grabbed him and then kissed him. She didn't even introduce herself first. She's just like, I'm gonna kiss you. I'm like, oh my goodness. Peter did not sign up for that. This was all part of a ploy for Mia to basically get in with Harry's entourage, wanting to get closer to him. But the weird part of the whole interaction was just how stalkery Mia was acting during this whole thing. It was like she was out to kill. She was like, Peter, I'm coming for you in this club. And Peter, rather than just confront Mia and be like, I'm really not into you and no thank you, decided to of course jump out a window instead. Because that's how Peter Parker likes to solve problems sometimes. This was less of a relationship and more a weird attempt at a romantic and sexy moment from Mia, but it's just really awkward and strange, and I felt it was so weird that I needed to include it, even though it's not a full relationship. Technically. Number 1. Jessica Carradine. Remember that time Ben Reilly pined after the daughter of the man who murdered Uncle Ben? No? Well, take a seat, cause yeah, that happened. Jessica Carradine is the daughter of Dennis Carradine, the name that would later be given to the man who killed Peter Parker's Uncle Ben. She grew up with a hatred of Spider-Man, believing that the hero was actually to blame for the death of both Ben and her father. She believed that her dad was basically framed by Spidey. Needless to say, she and Ben's relationship is catastrophically ruined when she realizes that he is Spider-Man. I don't even know why Ben would go for this if he was aware of Jessica's name and her ties to the man who murdered Uncle Ben, but hey, I guess it wasn't technically his uncle since he's just Peter's clone. One of Peter's clones. It should be noted that Jessica did eventually come to terms with the fact that her father was actually the guilty party, but she still couldn't be with Ben because she was then just too worried for his safety, since he often puts himself in various dangerous situations as Spidey. Number 10. Captain Marvel. I can't deny I actually kinda like this ship, but it still feels pretty out of left field, especially if you're more of a cinematic Marvel fan, and that's where a lot of your knowledge comes from. And even if you're not, while there has been quite a bit of flirting between the two in the comics, I would have never expected either hero to actually act on those flirtations and possible feelings. Anyways, Carol basically had a bit of a crush on Spidey, which has come up multiple times in the past, and both were close friends due to their time working side by side on the Avengers. While Carol herself tends to be a bit more serious and Peter is a bit more silly, the two have some pretty adorable interactions, and they also have a lot of strong mutual respect, which is what it's all about when it comes to romance, baby. They went on a date back when Carol was still operating under her Miss Marvel mantle, but her crush has also come up a few times since then. Spider-Man bartered to get that initial date with her in exchange for basically his superhero help. The date was awkward, but it ended on a not so bad note when both heroes kinda realized they were just working way too hard to impress the other person instead of just being themselves, which is also what romance should be all about, just being yourselves. Also, I like that I did this when I was talking about people having mutual respect. Like, this is fighting. I don't know why I did this, but you know, mutual respect. So we did see them go on that one date, however, we have not seen them date since, even though it went pretty well by the end of it. Number 9. Deadpool. Okay, so this one isn't an official romance, more of a bromance, but it's shipped enough by people that we could consider it a fan-based pseudo-romance, which, yeah, is a thing I just made up now, so that's a thing now. Fan-based pseudo-romances. That's a term. Basically, Deadpool is borderline in love and obsessed with Spider-Man. It's pretty one-sided for the most part, but the two do have their moments, and there are times when Deadpool even inspires Spider-Man, or at least makes Peter consider Deadpool's maybe not as terrible and as annoying as he originally thought. The two have helped each other out multiple times and even have a whole team-up series together, and it lasted 3 years. It's pretty romantic. Number 8. Mary Jane Watson. For this Spider-Man, we're not talking about Peter Parker, obviously. I'm not trying to argue that their relationship is weird, because, you know, it's been going on for a long time. Although at times, that relationship between Peter Parker and MJ definitely can be weird, I would argue. I'm actually talking about here the relationship between the Scarlet Spider and Mary Jane Watson. Ben Reilly, who for a time was also known as Spider-Man. While we don't actually see how their romance plays out in the alternate world belonging to Universe X, it is implied that the two had a daughter together there who grows up to become Spider-Girl. It's never explained how this came about, but the idea of Mary Jane ending up and settling down with Ben Reilly makes me wonder what happened to Peter in this alternate universe. Or is it possible that initially Mary Jane thought this was Peter, with Ben being himself a clone of Parker? I have so many questions. Number 7. Ultimate Katie Bishop. This weird romance belongs to the Spider-Man known as Miles Morales. What's the deal with this relationship? Well, in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, Kate Bishop is not like the one we have in Earth 616. She isn't Hawkeye's apprentice, nor does she become Hawkeye in this reality. Instead, we learn she is dating Miles Morales and is just a normal student. Or so it seems. In reality, her parents are Hydra agents who sedate Miles when he visits and then kidnap him and experiment on him, alongside Dr. Doom. Ultimate Dr. Doom. Fortunately, he does manage to escape and of course decides to break up with Katie before leaving. Gotta love those extreme ultimate romances. So weird. I also like that Miles was like, yeah, so you guys like kidnapped me and experimented on me, so I think I'm just gonna like break up? I think I'm just gonna break up with you, but this was weird. Thanks. It's like a weird way to end your relationship. Number 6. Jackpot. With Jackpot, it's all pretty confusing because we have Sarah Earhart, the real superpowered Jackpot, and Alana Jobson, who is posing as Jackpot and uses drugs to give herself powers so she can become a hero. Here we are mostly talking about Alana Jobson. Alana Jobson, who is posing as Jackpot. While Alana herself is implied as being attracted to Sarah, when posing as Jackpot and fighting alongside Spider-Man, he initially thinks that she might be his ex-girlfriend Mary Jane. The two of them have a few flirty moments while fighting together. Jackpot even calls him Tiger, considering the name of her character is obviously meant to be a play on Mary Jane's famous catchphrase, "You just hit the jackpot, Tiger." This is also what compels Spider-Man to want to learn more about the new superhero. In reality, Alana Jobson is paying Sarah to use her superhero identity and registration papers, because she just really wants to be a hero. She ends up dying as a result of this desire when the superpower inducing drugs and hormones she uses together end up killing her when mixed with a blindness serum, despite Spider-Man successfully giving her the antidote to said serum. This romance never really goes anywhere, it just ends in tragedy. Number 6. Emma Frost. This one is pretty strange, but it's also coming at us from an alternate reality, so you know, you kinda just gotta go with it. I think what really shocked me about it though is that Kitty Pryde and Peter Parker were also known to date in the Ultimate Universe, and so I've always kind of thought of Kitty as being, you know, quite younger than Emma, and that was the thing that made me go like, wait, what? So how old? What's happening? So I was just confused in general by that logic, although this is comics, so while in some realities characters may have a greater age gap, in others they may actually be the exact same age, closing that gap completely. And in this comic, that is what is happening. In Marvel Adventures Spider-Man, which takes place in the alternate reality of Earth 20051, both Emma Frost and her BFF Shat Sandoval had a crush on Spidey, and Emma Frost is the same age as him here, so it's not weird. It's a little weird, but it's not weird. Emma, being a telepath, used her powers to uncover his secret identity, and she causes a bit of trouble when Chad and Peter start dating. Eventually, her trickery, however, is exposed, and she's forced to face the consequences of her actions. Here, Emma Frost is known by the codename Silencer, and ends up becoming an ally to both Chad and Spider-Man later on. Number 4. Black Widow. The strange thing is, while this happened in Marvel Team Up issue number 82 as a quick little thing, when Black Widow loses her memory temporarily, it also has been a comic ship in an alternate world where there is an amalgam alternate version of Black Widow who is basically a blend of both Black Widow and Black Cat, which yes, is one of the coolest alternates for both Black Cat and Black Widow. I know, it's pretty great. The issue where these two, however, initially hook up comes to us from way back before that. How it ends up happening is Spider-Man saves the day for Black Widow, who at the time believes she is a school teacher named Nancy Rushman. The other weird thing is that Natasha has also lost her memories of who she is, but has managed to retain her fighting know-how, and also assists Spider-Man with apprehending criminals, not thinking that it is weird at all for her to be doing. But, you know, I guess the fighting know-how maybe is in her physical memory? I don't know how that all works, but brains, stuff, wiring, physical memory? Spider-Man recognizes her and recognizes that her being enamored with him is admittedly pretty weird, as is the fact that she thinks she's a woman named Nancy Rushman when she's not. Once her memories are back, Black Widow is over the flirtation and basically just dips at the end of the issue. She's like, this was cool, but also not into you. Bye. Only me as Nancy Rushman was into you, Spider-Man, sorry about that. Number 3. Spider-Woman. While this isn't an official thing that has happened as of yet, we have gotten quite a few flirty moments between Spider-Man and Jessica Drew from Brian Michael Bendis' run on the Avengers. They weren't full-on shipped, but there was definitely some suggestive light shipping happening there. At one point when they are teamed up, Jessica even scans Spider-Man to make sure he's not a Skrull, just because she finds him to be so strange. His response was to ask if they were on a date. I guess he's just used to women calling him weird on dates, which kind of makes sense because Peter Parker is pretty awkward and weird. Fair enough. Number 2. Silk. One of the strangest romances that Peter has ever had is with another one of the Spider folks, Silk, Cindy Moon. Apparently they were both bit by the same radioactive spider, which is why they believe they are so irresistibly infatuated with one another. Either that or they just are inexplicably attracted to each other. The whole fact that they don't seem to have control of their physical urge to be together makes this relationship one of the weirdest that Peter has ever had, and kind of one of the most uncomfortable in my opinion, especially as even when they're in danger they just feel the urge to just get physical instead of, dealing with the problem at hand. Like, their attraction to one another not only seems to be completely uncontrollable, but it can also potentially endanger innocent lives, or their own lives even. Number 1. Marrow. Yep, probably one of the weirdest relationships that's happened out there for Peter Parker. There was a random time that he briefly dated Marrow. Why? Well, I don't know, cause comics. These two dated very briefly and even had a team-up one-shot titled Spider-Man Marrow in the early 2000s, which delved into their brief relationship and Marrow's change in personality. Their relationship ended after Marrow realized she wasn't really herself, as she was being brainwashed and used by S.H.I.E.L.D. to hunt down life model decoys. After she regained her memories, she escaped S.H.I.E.L.D., but the two ultimately broke up because she hadn't quite been herself basically throughout their relationship, so that'll do it. Oh, also she was a student at ESU where Peter was guest lecturing as a grad student, and Sarah refers to him multiple times in this issue as Mr. Parker, which I cannot deny I found quite a bit creepy. If you're calling your partner Mr. something, I don't know about that. Seems weird. Maybe that's just me.
Number 10. Carol Danvers. While this one never became a tried and true relationship, there was a kind of strange but interesting time that these two went on a date. Now, how did this happen? Well, Spider-Man agreed to do a favor for Carol, but in exchange blurted out that he wanted a date with her. The date itself is super awkward and terrible, but as such proves to make for a pretty hilarious read. You can check it out in Miss Marvel issue 47. Both Carol and Peter struggle to find anything to talk about over a dinner at a nice restaurant. The dinner is then interrupted by evil Hammer agents who are dealt with before the two finish off the night eating junk food together on a rooftop. It actually ends on a nice note, with the two realizing the awkwardness was likely coming from the fact that they were both too concerned with impressing one another. Other than a few cute and infrequent moments of flirting between the two, this relationship has never really been revisited, but it's safe to say that Carol and Peter will always respect and care for one another, even if they aren't currently getting romantic together. Number 9. Betty Brant. Betty Brant was the secretary of J. Jonah Jameson. She and Peter met through their jobs at the Daily Bugle, and after an incident with Betty where Peter disguised as Spider-Man saved her life, he realized that he had feelings for her. They dated for some time, but their relationship ended when Betty suspected that Peter might have feelings for one of his fellow classmates. It turned out that this was all a misunderstanding, but regardless, Betty ended up moving on, dating and eventually marrying Peter's friend and co-worker, Ned Leeds, who of course also worked at the Bugle. Despite no longer being together, Betty has always considered Peter one of her best and most reliable friends. Number 8. Carly Cooper. After MJ and Peter's marriage was over and done with, Peter slowly ended up moving on. Carly Cooper was one of the first women he ended up with after MJ and he ended things. CARLIE was a forensic specialist who ended up going on a few dates with Peter, and eventually, after much humming and hawing, the two ended up as a couple for a time. In fact, it was Mary Jane herself who helped the two get together, making CARLIE see that what was holding Peter back from committing to their relationship really was himself, and helping Peter to see the same. The relationship didn't last, unfortunately, as Peter's life as a vigilante, as Spider-Man, ended up wedging the two of them apart, and they broke up. CARLIE has been hot and cold with Peter since then, sometimes his friend and confidant, and sometimes wanting nothing to do with him. Number 7. Silver Sable. These two never really got a chance to explore a relationship, but Silver Sable is definitely a love interest that has become popular with fans. Popular enough that she appeared in the PS4 Spider-Man game DLC content Silver Lining, where sparks between the two characters flew. In the comics, Silver Sable is a well-trained mercenary and owner of the company Silver Sable International. Silver Sablenova is from the small fictional Eastern European country of Simkaria, and is known for being an ally of Spider-Man. She is one tough cookie you do not want to mess with. Silver Sable only ever flirted with Spider-Man, and then revealed her feelings for him only somewhat when they thought the world was ending. Number 6. Silk. These two instantly had a very magnetic and physical attraction to one another. Spider-Man learned that Cindy Moon was another spider person / spider totem who had been holed up in a bunker for years in order to protect her from the villain Morlun. He freed Cindy from the bunker. I mean, she could have left at any time really, but she didn't because she knew the risk, by giving her the information that Morlun had been defeated. Both immediately had a strong and unexplainable attraction to one another, which could in theory have been caused by the fact that it was revealed that they were both bitten by the same radioactive spider, which granted them their abilities. They had a very physically intimate relationship during their time together due to their off-of-the-charts pheromone attraction to one another, and Silk still remains an ally of Peter's. Number 5. Kitty Pryde. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, a young Kitty and Peter had a budding romance that many fans enjoyed. The two got together after ending relationships with their current partners, Kitty breaking up with Iceman and Peter breaking up with Mary Jane. Most of their time together was spent taking down criminals, and as such, Kitty was forced to wear a mask costume to prevent anyone from recognizing her and piecing together Spider-Man's secret identity. These two were super cute together, as both of them are kind of awkward yet charming characters. Like with most of Peter's relationships, his need to protect his secret identity ended up being the force to drive them apart, as this also meant that the two had to keep their romantic relationship secret, lest people somehow use that to figure out that Kitty and Peter were the pair of masked vigilantes. Though in the end, it was Peter getting back with Mary Jane that really put an end to their relationship. Although Kitty never really stopped having feelings for Peter, even after he was dead. Number 4. Spider-Gwen. While Spider-Gwen is obviously not a love interest for Peter Parker, whom this list has mostly been about, she is the main love interest for another famous and popular Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And Spider-Gwen and Miles are so cute together, I just had to include them. Their love for one another is so strong that it crosses universes, with Spider-Gwen being from Earth 65, whereas Miles was originally from Earth 1610. These two met and developed feelings for one another, but decided to stay friends. For now anyways. Although the two did witness a potential future where they ended up married with superpowered kids on Earth 8. Number 3. Black Cat. Felicia Hardy is one of the fan favorites when it comes to Spider-Man's most famous love interests. Black Cat almost instantly fell for Spider-Man upon him chasing her down. She is sometimes a criminal, sometimes a hero, and sometimes a neutral party in the Marvel-verse. The two have dated and flirted on and off for years, but it's usually Felicia's obsession with Peter's Spider-Man persona, her jealousy, and her sometimes criminal ways that gets between the two. Though the two have also broken up over other things, like when Spider-Man was kind of worried about Black Cat's safety as a non-powered vigilante. This concern actually inspired Felicia to get powers, which she obtained from the shady villain Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin. Needless to say, she was forced to keep the origins of powers themselves a secret from Peter, while her powers themselves also made her and Spider-Man's relationship more difficult, as it turned out she ended up with bad luck powers, which infected her enemies and those closest to her, which includes Peter Parker. Just her luck. Number 2. Gwen Stacy. Gwen will always be one of the big love interests for Peter because she was one of his first loves, and the one he lost the most dramatically. The loss of Uncle Ben and Gwen Stacy have haunted Peter for years, and often still do haunt him today. Peter Parker's story as Spider-Man is nothing without that loss and that feeling of responsibility. It is what has weighed him down while also inspiring him to be a hero, and it has shaped him into the person he is today. Originally, Gwen and Peter both bonded over their love of science, and she fell for him. The death of her father caused a rift in their relationship as Gwen blamed Spider-Man, not knowing that Peter himself was Spider-Man. While also resenting Peter for being so absent around her time of mourning, because, he was Spider-Man, so he was off doing Spider-Man stuff. Peter had promised her father right before he died to protect Gwen, and yet, while trying to save her, she died. The fateful panel where he manages to secure her falling body with his webbing is often pointed to when it comes to why Spider-Man blames himself. Whether or not she was dead before Spider-Man managed to grab her, that fateful snap of her neck will always haunt him and readers. Gwen represents for Peter what could have been. She will always make him wonder, inspire him to be better, and he will always love her. Number 1. Mary Jane. While Mary Jane may have initially lost out with Peter to Gwen when Peter and MJ were in that school year love triangle, Mary Jane was the character left standing at the very end, and as such ended up with Peter. But really, what keeps these two so close is more than that. More than just that convenience. Not only is Mary Jane stunning, but she is kind, empathetic, and really seems to understand Peter in a way no one else does. Sure, she can't always be with him because understanding someone doesn't mean you can always stand them, but the two are usually guaranteed to always get back together. Mary Jane will always be there for Peter and proud to know him, and he'll always admire her boldness and her commitment to do what's right. Both will always love one another, and in a way, be one another's heroes.
Starting us off in at number 10, Carol Danvers. No one really wanted Peter Parker and Carol Danvers to be a thing, but that's still what we got. And in Ms. Marvel Volume 2, Issue 34, Peter asks Carol out, which she said yes to since he had helped her when she was depowered. He was a tad forceful of him. Then in issue 47 of her solo series, the two of them actually went out on a date at an upscale restaurant, and it is pretty painful to watch until the date is interrupted by supervillains, thank god. The pair take them out, then end up eating chili dogs on a roof that overlooks the city. Later, it would continue to get weird between the two of them when they teamed up to fight Mac Gargan's Venom, but quite frankly, we're really glad this relationship never really hit the ground running. It's definitely one we can do without. In at number 9, Rogue. In the world of X-Men Forever, which takes place on Earth 161, we got to see a romance blossom between Spider-Man and Rogue. This Rogue had absorbed Nightcrawler's powers, which also changed her to look a lot more like him physically, which did not bode well with her. After that went down, she found herself crossing paths with Spider-Man after dealing with a robbery in New York. Feeling a little lost, she decided to spend the night with him, accompanying him on his patrol, which led to sparks between the two. They actually almost kissed, and would've if it wasn't for being interrupted by the screams of a nearby Jean Grey. Up next, number 8, Spider-Gwen. Okay, so I know we said we wouldn't be talking about alternates of Gwen Stacy with Peter Parker, but this alternate of Gwen had her sights set on a different man in the Spider-Man mantle. We're talking Miles Morales. Spider-Gwen is the Gwen Stacy aka Spider-Woman of Earth 65. Now under the Marvel Now line, she and Miles would get romantically involved with one another. And side note, their Earth 8 alternates even got married. They starred in a story titled Sitting in a Tree, in which their two titles crossed over and made for a story that had our hearts pitter-pattering all the way through. I mean, how could you not ship them? They're so cute together. I mean, unless you're actually one of those people who shipped Miles and Kamala Khan, in which case I am very sorry for your loss. In at 7, CARLIE Cooper. CARLIE Cooper is another exception on our list. She first appeared in the 2008 Amazing Spider-Man issue 545. She's a forensic specialist who ended up dating Peter after he and MJ broke up after the One More Day story event. Now the two of them had a bit of a slow burn flirtation before they finally went out on a date together. Eventually though, she would figure out that Peter was Spider-Man, and growing tired of his lies to her, she broke up with him. While she wasn't a superhero when they were dating, she would eventually become a villain briefly, operating under the name of Monster, gaining powers from the Goblin formula that gave her superhuman strength, speed, and stamina. Up next, number 6, Betty Brant. Betty Brant is a civilian character that Peter has dated in the past. She first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 4 in 1963, dated Peter briefly, but then would go on to date Flash Thompson. But once upon a time, in What If Volume 1 issue 17, she was actually a superhero, appearing in the story What If the Radioactive Spider had bitten someone else. Now, as you can imagine, in this hypothetical tale, Peter was not bitten by the radioactive spider, but bet he was, giving her his powers. She confides in the civilian Peter, and he begins to assist her, essentially acting as a sidekick of sorts to her Spider-Woman, or rather, the amazing Spider-Girl as she preferred to be called. And at one point she fails to stop a criminal from escaping, which leads to the death of Peter's Uncle Ben. Now because of this, she gives up fighting crime altogether. But Peter still goes on to become Spider-Man, with synthetic powers of course. Moving on to number 5, Marrow. Mutant Marrow and Spider-Man had a brief entanglement after Marrow was brainwashed to be a sleeper agent for S.H.I.E.L.D. Operating under the alias Sarah Rushman, which fun fact was a previous alias of Black Widow's, she had a bit of a split personality, in which Marrow would terminate life model decoys, and then Sarah was a college kid at Empire State University. That's where she developed a crush on Peter, who was lecturing there, and the two ended up going out on a few dates before he realized who she truly was. Eventually that would dissipate, with Parker helping her break free from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s control by faking her own suicide in a Spider-Man Marrow one-shot crossover from 2001. Up next at 4, Silk. Silk, aka Cindy Moon, first hit the scene in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 1 volume 3. The character was bitten by the same radioactive spider as Peter was, but from there on out suffered a different kind of tragic origin story than what Parker had endured. She was kidnapped and forced to train inside of a bunker, where she was held captive by a mysterious man named Ezekiel in an attempt to hide her from Moreland, who was killing off spider-powered peeps. Eventually Peter learned of her existence, and when she was free, the two couldn't help but notice that they were super attracted to one another, unnaturally so. It was intense. Turns out it was actually a product of their pheromones, with the two of them overcome by primal urges to jump each other's bones. They eventually had to part ways because these urges were just too strong and too overwhelming, hindering their efforts to fight crime and just exist. Cindy would go on to begin her own costume superhero career separate of Peter. In at number 3, Kitty Pryde. Peter's relationship with Kitty Pryde isn't one that took place in the 616 universe, but rather on Earth 1610, in the Ultimate Universe. During Ultimate Comics Spider-Man, Kitty develops a crush on Peter when Spider-Man and the X-Men team up in Queens to take down the Latverian mutant Geldof. After being charmed by the web-slinger, Kitty asked him out on a date. Over the course of their relationship, they would work together to take on villains, and eventually Peter started to feel some tension about the fact that Kitty's X-Men persona was way more public versus the secret identity that he had been striving to maintain. Eventually though, the two break up, which did not go smoothly. But luckily over time they made amends, with them even becoming good friends after the fact. In at number 2, Silver Sable. A sometimes antagonist, sometimes ally of Spider-Man's, Silver Sable, who was introduced in 1985 to The Amazing Spider-Man issue 265, has never hooked up romantically with Peter in the 616, but there's certainly been lots of tension and flirtation to say the least. But we did get to see a glimpse of what that underlying sexual tension could amount to in What If Volume 2 issue 21, which was titled What If Spider-Man Had Married the Black Cat. Now in this story, Black Cat is accidentally murdered by Paladin, and Spider-Man ends up getting romantically involved with Silver Sable in the aftermath. They both bond over the grief they share of their dead loved ones. By the end, it is a bit ambiguous as to whether or not their relationship worked out in the long run. And last but not least, speaking of, we have Black Cat at number 1. Black Cat, aka Felicia Hardy, may have originally been a villain of Spider-Man's, now an anti-hero, but if anything, her criminality made the romantic relationship between her and Peter Parker that much more steamier. Created by Marv Wolfman and Keith Pollard in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, Felicia actually chose to become more of an anti-hero because of her relationship with Spider-Man, even becoming his partner for a while. Although she didn't care much for Peter Parker the civilian, she was way more into Spider-Man the vigilante, and one of the reasons why the two would split up was because of this. Now they've had an on-again, off-again relationship over the years, with Black Cat working as one of Spidey's biggest allies at their best, and her slipping back into the life of a criminal when they've been at their worst. Although that relationship between the two of them may have been tipped permanently into negative land, thanks to Otto Octavius running around in Peter's body as the superior Spider-Man, having broken Black Cat's teeth and abandoned her for the police to pick up. Yeah, definitely something that would make someone not want to be into you. Just saying.